Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. This is a Ukraine war geopolitics kind of little nugget of an extra concerning particularly the relationship between Trump and Ukraine and the war in general. What he's been saying and unfortunately the direction of travel, it appears to be away from supporting Ukraine. So there was an Atlantic article that came out subsequent to the phone call between Putin and Trump the other day. So the White House is discussing ending support for Kyiv. Trump is outraged by Ukraine's strikes on Russia, according to the Atlantic. This is about an attack on Russian military airfields of strategic aviation. And on the one hand, we had heard rumors that Trump had called this, and I guess this would be an intuition, badass. Like when you hear about that Operation Spiderweb, you think, wow, that was pretty amazing. That's really cool. But on the other hand, I think he also has intuitions of support for Russia and sympathy and empathy and adulation even for Putin. And so when Ukraine does something successful against Russia, his reactions are going to turn to, well, actually, that sucks and Russia are going to hit you back hard. And I'm kind of in support of that because I don't like Zelensky. Why he keeps finding the opportunity to criticize Zelensky, even when he should be criticizing Putin. So he has this both sidesism. You know, he was asked directly in the White House with Mertz the other day, are you on the side of Ukraine? And he starts going, well, yeah, I'm for Ukraine, but blah, 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 blah. And when, are you going to put sanctions on Russia? Yeah, well, actually, I'm going to put them on both sides type thing. And you're like, what? You're going to sanction Ukraine? So every opportunity he has to be harsh to Russia, he takes that to actually give a criticism of Ukraine. And the Atlantic piece here says, Ukraine got a major battle victory. Trump is not happy. The president has fumed that Kyiv's drone strike could prolong a war that he's desperate to end. We're going to read parts of this out. I'm going to read parts of this out to you. These sources told me that the drone strike has reignited the president's long-held displeasure with the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. So if you understand that Trump has this foundation of dislike for Zelensky, he's called him, quote, a bad guy previously. I mean, this is a guy that's fighting for, and I think fighting courageously, amazingly, should go down in history, fighting on behalf of his nation. And yet Trump calls him a bad guy and sees him as a bad guy because he tried to get dirt on Biden, Trump, in exchange for the deadly weapons that Congress had appropriated for Ukraine, and Zelensky refused to give him the dirt, and then Trump was impeached for that. So Trump hates Zelensky, irrespective of how morally upstanding Zelensky is. He hates Zelensky and he doesn't like Ukraine. And all of this seems to be perfectly obvious when you understand his positioning on Ukraine and Russia. So this long-held displeasure with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and prompted a new debate on the White House about whether the United States should abandon Ukraine. Throughout the war, Trump has deemed Zelensky a, quote, bad guy and a, quote, hothead. The outside advisor said, someone who could be pushing the globe toward World War III. Trump privately echoed a right-wing talking point this week by criticizing Zelensky for supposedly showboating after the drone attacks. According to the advisor, Trump was impressed with the audacity of the strikes, but believes that Zelensky's focus should have been on the Ukraine-Russia negotiations in Istanbul. You know, he shouldn't be trying to defend himself. He shouldn't be trying to win in the war. There is no space in Trump's head for Ukraine winning. He doesn't care for a just peace. He wants a peace as quickly as possible, and preferably one that advantages Russia so that he can start this wonderful relationship with Putin up again, whereby trade is flowing between the US and Russia, and he's taking advantage of the Russian hydrocarbons, getting his industry in there, blah, blah, blah. So Ukraine shouldn't be focusing on defending itself. It shouldn't be focusing upon getting advantages in this war. It should just be capitulating to Russia. The article continues, Steve Bannon and other influential MAGA voices have berated Ukraine for the attack and are attempting to push Washington further from Kyiv. So this is Operation Spiderweb. On his podcast this week, Bannon blamed Ukraine for, in his view, sabotaging peace talks while potentially provoking a massive response from Russia. Quote, Zelensky didn't give the President of the United States a heads up to say he's going to do a deep strike into strategic forces of Russia, which is going up the escalatory ladder as quickly as you can on the day before your meeting with in Turkey. Now, Bannon said on the eve of the peace talks as well, or ceasefire talks, he takes the Japanese role in Pearl Harbor, the sneak attack. Bannon has conveyed similar messages to senior West Wing advisors, a fourth administration official told me. So we need to take, I know some people are saying, oh, stop telling us what Steve Bannon thinks, it's irrelevant. No, it's not irrelevant. He is White House adjacent and he has contacts in the White House and he informs really a lot of Trump's ideology. And if he's saying this is absolutely heinous and Zelensky should be in trouble for doing this, he should have asked permission to attack Russia, then that's important. Trump will take notice of what Bannon says. Keith Kellogg, who would otherwise be should be very supportive of Ukraine, his daughter is in Kyiv, working, I think, for a humanitarian organization. He even is recently becoming more and more of a regurgitator of Russian talking points. He said, Keith Kellogg, Trump's Ukraine envoy, warned on Fox News that, quote, the risk levels are going way up because the drone struck part of Russia's national survival system, its nuclear program, potentially pushing to retaliate in significant ways. Trump has not increased aid to Ukraine since taking office in January, and he is yet to endorse a bipartisan Senate push led by his ally Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina to impose harsh economic penalties against Russia and countries that do business with it. And that's where we're going to go after this article. Because not only had he not read it, even by the time he met with Merz in the White House in the Oval Office, but now there are rumours that he is trying to water it down. Now, there have been other recent signs that the White House is distancing itself from Ukraine too. Yesterday, so the other day now, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth did not attend the meeting of 50 defense ministers at NATO headquarters in Brussels. In the past, the meeting had been an important venue for coordinating military aid for Ukraine. Hegseth was the first US Defense Secretary to skip the event in 3 years. The Pentagon cited scheduling issues for his absence. When I asked a White House spokesperson for comment about the drone strikes, she pointed me to Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt's briefing room remarks on Tuesday, where Leavitt had said that Trump, quote, wants this war to end at the negotiating table, and he's made that clear to both sides, to both leaders, both publicly and privately. In public remarks about the strikes, Putin downplayed the chances of a ceasefire, asking, quote, who has negotiations with terrorists? But Zelensky told reporters that the operation over the weekend, codenamed Spider's Web, would not have been carried out if Putin had agreed a US proposed truce. Quote, if there had been a ceasefire, would the operation have taken place? Zelensky asked. No. Exasperated with the conflict, Trump continues to muse about walking away from any sort of diplomatic solution. And of course, this is punishment to Ukraine. He kind of frames it as a punishment to Russia. If Russia doesn't play ball, we're just going to walk away. Well, that's exactly what Russia want. Do you know what we're going to do, Russia? We're going to punish you by giving you exactly what you want. We're going to walk away from the conflict. We won't help Ukraine anymore, and we won't put any pressure on Russia. We just walk away and say this isn't our thing to end. Because Trump thinks the only thing that should be happening here is a quick peace, no matter what the cost of that peace. And so it's like, well, if you don't want that quick peace, no matter what the cost, I'm just going to walk away. Well, Russia doesn't want a quick peace because they want a maximalist agenda achieved. Ukraine doesn't want a quick peace because it's going to screw them over. So of course no one wants that quick peace. But if that's all you're thinking about because you're projecting your own ideas onto everyone else, then you are just going to walk away. And that will be a punishment to Ukraine. So Trump said, the article continues, in his Truth Social post about his call with Putin, the president seemed eager to change the subject to focus on ending a different international crisis. Quote, we also discussed Iran, Trump wrote about ongoing talks regarding Tehran's nuclear ambitions. Quote, President Putin suggested that he will participate in the discussions with Iran and that he could perhaps be helpful in getting this brought to a rapid conclusion. But of course, Putin's on Iran's side. Russia and Iran are allied. I mean, this is just naive at best. So Trump is he's all over the shop. Well, he's not all over the shop. He's exactly where we've always thought him to be, which is firmly on the side of Russia and a place where he just doesn't understand the conflict, doesn't understand global geopolitics. He just has a fundamental lack of knowledge of what he needs to know. Reuters reports Russia urges the US and UK to restrain Ukraine after attacks on bombers. So Russia comes out and says, hey, and actually starts blaming the UK for this, saying that we were the ones providing intelligence. Say the US didn't. If you listen to the ambassador to the UK, the Russian ambassador to the UK, he was interviewed the other day and basically said, well, the US weren't providing intelligence. This is coming from the UK because we know that Trump's not helping. Essentially, I'm paraphrasing. You say, we know that Trump's not helping Ukraine. So this information is coming from the UK. And he starts blaming the UK for Operation Spiderweb. And now Reuters is saying that Russia is urging the US and the UK to restrain Ukraine. So we now need to restrain Ukraine because, hey, they're going and defending themselves and we can't have them defending themselves. No wonder Trump said, according to Roman Sheremetyev, no wonder Trump said that he's considering imposing sanctions on Ukraine. He's just following orders from the Kremlin. Russia urges US to restrain Ukraine by then saying, well, we're going to both sides this. That's what Trump said in the conversation with Merz. Ridiculous idea that somehow both sides need to be sanctioned as a result of the war that was imposed upon Ukraine. It's just, honestly, Donald Trump is morally reprehensible. There is no other way to understand it. He's morally reprehensible. So Wall Street Journal then reports that the White House is quietly pressuring the Senate to water down the Russia sanctions. Trump administration officials urge Senator Lindsey Graham to weaken the legislation. This is not good at all. If it is true, well, I think it probably is true. It's almost certainly true, in my opinion, because I think when it comes to Wall Street Journal reporting on Trump, I think they are pretty decent. And they, coming from a kind of Murdoch right-wing Republican point of view, when they say things against Trump's positioning and whatnot, when they are critical of Trump, it almost has a bit more value than, say, MSNBC or someone far on the other side of the spectrum. Now, as Pekka Kaliniemi says, Agent Krasnov strikes again. Trump is obviously going to have to come out and deny this, which apparently, well, not apparently, he has done. So Trump has denied reports that he has been in talks with the Senate to water down Lindsey Graham's Russia sanctions bill. Quote, no, I haven't talked to them about it. They have a bill. It's up to me. That's my choice. They made it that way. It's a very strong bill. But he can actually be true in saying I haven't talked to them about it, because it won't be him. It will be his administration. It will be his advisors. Hence, Trump administration officials urge Senator Lindsey Graham to water it down. Not Trump himself. He sends off his minions, or his minions do it on their own behalf, because I think half of Trump's opinions, or most of Trump's opinions, are derived from what people around him tell him. Because he doesn't know enough. He doesn't read anything. He has no decent knowledge about geopolitics and the history and culture and the causality of the war in Ukraine and Ukraine and Russia. He is just a victim of the whisperers around him. So whoever it is, and we can say, for example, Stephen Miller might be the one that goes off to the Senate to tell them what to do, and he comes back and tells Trump, everything. Trump's opinions are derived from the opinions of those around him. Now, the Kyiv Independent then reports that Trump is reluctant to confront China over its support for Russia's war in Ukraine, according to Bloomberg. So all this bombastic rhetoric about China and putting on these these tariffs on China, this would be the perfect opportunity. You've got China in the crosshairs. You want to demonize China. China is your enemy. And yet he can't even use the war in Ukraine and China's support of Russia against China. It is absolutely incredible. Despite Trump's current stance, the European Union has maintained public pressure on China, both through diplomatic channels and public statements. So the EU is having to pick up the slack here because Trump is in dereliction of his duty, I would argue. And he is just beholden to Russia to the point where even China's support of Russia is off limits for Trump. Just incredible. Now, Zelensky has a very difficult role because anything that Trump says that is wildly inaccurate, problematic, and hurtful to Ukraine, it's almost like Zelensky can't say anything, because any criticism, what Trump says, or any corrective, even if it's a soft corrective, is seen as a massive affront to the very thin-skinned Trump administration. But you can't just sit there and let Trump lie about you and your country. So Trump came out with this analogy the other day with Mertz that, Russia and Ukraine are like two kids in a playground. And sometimes you just got to let them use up their energy. You just got to let them fight for a little bit. You let them fight for a little bit, get out their system, and then you can sort things out. So it's a bit like an ice hockey match or a fight on a playground. You just let them get it out just for a short period. But, 3 years is not a short period, and a lot of people are dying, and you keep saying how terrible it is that people are dying, and then you're justifying not really getting that involved because you've got to let them get their energy out. Get their energy out by, I don't know, sending missiles into a capital city, into apartment blocks and killing women and children. Just let that energy out. You've had too much sugar. How can you not reply to that as a president of that nation? So ABC interviewed Zelensky, and this is what he said.
President Zelensky, you speak so powerfully about the loss in your country and what your people have suffered. Do you think the president is getting that message when he says things like it's two children fighting?
Zelensky then telling us, and the president who is not living here, and it's not about President Trump, it's about any person who is not here in the country, who is some thousands of miles away, cannot feel fully and understand this pain. And this is why we are not kids with Putin at the playground in the park. This is why I am saying he is a murderer who came to this park to kill the kids.
I think that's a really good response, and he's still probably going to prompt the ire of Donald Trump here, because there's nothing he can say other than silence, but then silence is to condone what Trump has said, so you can't condone that. But I think that's on point, that one, Trump and no leader can be in a position to properly understand, especially since Trump has never even visited Ukraine. You can't be, certainly since the war has begun, you can't be in a position where you really understand what Ukrainians feel and why they're doing things when you're not experiencing the pain and suffering that Ukrainians are experiencing in the country on a daily basis. And that's not just a Trump thing, that's everyone. And I think that's well put. But then he goes on to say, this isn't a case of two kids in a play park. This is Putin coming to a play park and murdering kids. That's what this is. And that's very powerful. That's very well said. And it's not like overly critical of Trump, but it is a corrective, and it's a corrective that needed to be said. Now, Trump on Air Force One last night was,
Russia, Ukraine. Did the Ukraine drone strikes against the bombers inside Russia, the airfields, did that change your view at all of what Zelensky, the cards he has?
So, did the strikes on the bombers in Russia change your view on the cards that Zelensky has? Because Trump had famously said that Zelensky in the White House, in the Oval Office, you have no cards. And then time and time again, Zelensky showed himself to have at least some cards. So has this changed Trump's view?
Well, they gave Putin a reason to go in and bomb the hell out of him last night. That's the thing I didn't like about it. When I saw it,
So that's the thing I didn't like about it. So his answer is critical of Zelensky. He's not like, Zelensky's got cards, well done, this is a very well carried out operation. This is, well, it's given Putin a reason to go to have a go back at Ukraine, and that's what I didn't like about it. So his go-to is a criticism of Ukraine. No, I couldn't care whether he's got any cards. I don't like what he did.
I said, here we go. Now it's going to be a strike.
here we go, now it's going to be a strike, but yeah, here we go, now you've just welcomed in further attacks from Russia. You should just sit there and let Russia bomb your cities, and you should not do anything about it. You should just capitulate to Russia. It's unbelievable that you would try and win this war. It's unbelievable that you would stand up to Russia. Imagine Russia invaded the US and Trump would be advocating like we just need to sit back and not react because otherwise we'll incur the wrath of Putin. And, you know, Alaska, unfortunately, we just need to not do anything and let Alaska be taken. Oh, now they've moved into Oregon. Now Washington State. And okay, it is obviously insane that you would be advocating for your country to capitulate. But what Trump is doing is advocating for Ukraine to just give up and let Russia get its way. And any time that Ukraine puts up a fight, there's a criticism of Ukraine. It is absolutely unacceptable. Now, a Kremlin official has said the US Senate, quote, hotheads who have lost their remnants of common sense don't realize Russia won't change its demands to end the war. So this is in light of the Senators Lindsey Graham and Richard Blumenthal bill to put sanctions on Russia. He's saying that it won't change its demands to end the war. He also argued that the threats of sanctions cannot change Russia's maximalist approach to potential peace deal. Now, the problem here's a problem. If you are not receiving intelligence briefings, Donald Trump has received 14 briefings since the beginning of his tenure. So from January the 20th to May, Trump had received 14 intelligence briefings in the same period, exactly the same period. Biden had received 90. In other words, most days Biden was receiving an intelligence briefing, which is absolutely how it should be. If you are in charge of the US and the US is at the center of global geopolitics, you need to be taking intelligence briefings every day. You cannot make good decisions if you do not have good information. Trump does not have good information. I keep talking to you about how he is fundamentally ignorant of the things he needs to know. Absolutely, 100%. And I don't think he's ever finding out what Russia's actually saying. Literally, like the Duma representatives and Putin can be saying all sorts of things. And it is incumbent upon the people who are around Trump, like Stephen Miller, to give that information to Trump. Trump doesn't get this information himself. He's playing golf. He's fanning around doing whatever he does. But he's not getting intelligence briefings. He's not reading reports. He doesn't read books. He doesn't read articles. He gets fed the summaries of articles in the certain areas of the press to him by the people around him. And he gets fed the information that he does get from a very select few people, I would maintain. And so something like this, a Kremlin official saying that nothing's going to change, we still have a maximalist approach to negotiations, we are going to take all of Ukraine type thing. Trump needs to know this, but he probably doesn't and won't. He won't be told it. And that's an absolute, I think it's an international crisis. It's a diplomatic crisis when you have the single most important politician in the world, arguably, being fundamentally ignorant about what he needs to know. So that's a real problem. And I'm going to just finish with this because this kind of sums it all up in quite a formal way. So some of you will be still fans of Trump, right? And thinking he's the right guy for Ukraine. But we in the UK have just had a strategic defence review written by a bunch of people, former NATO Secretary General Lord Robertson, Fiona Hill, the former National Security Advisor or Council member to Donald Trump in Trump 1.0, and then she was called as a witness in the impeachment, and a number of other people, General Barons and others. And it was it's a well-received SDR, Security Defence Review. And we can argue about how well it's going to be implemented and this and that. But you have a bunch of serious people, and by the way, it has also an annex to it that's only recently been found out that is not available to the public. So there's some very secretive stuff in there, probably talking about relationships with the United States and Russia. But in this, we have kind of an official, because I think it's been basically given the green light by our government. So the official government position, essentially, in the UK is that Russia is at war with Britain and the US is no longer a reliable ally. And actually, we need to take notice of this. So it's not just me sitting here and saying, "Oh, Trump is an idiot," and the US are unreliable as far as top down. This is a position of the UK government now. So let's just dip into this article concerning government defense expert Fiona Hill. So she's dual citizen US. She's been living in the US for 30 years. She's from County Durham in the UK. But she's been involved in the US security infrastructure and architecture for a very long time. But she was called back to help with this report, with this strategy. Okay, strategic defense review, not security, strategic defense review. So we're in pretty big trouble, Hill said, describing the UK's political situation as caught between the rock of Vladimir Putin's Russia and the hard place of Donald Trump's increasingly unpredictable US. Quote, Russia has hardened as an adversary in ways that we probably hadn't fully anticipated, Hill said, arguing that Putin saw the Ukraine war as a starting point to Moscow becoming a, quote, a dominant military power in all of Europe. As part of the long-term effort, Russia was already, quote, menacing the UK in various different ways, she said, citing, quote, the poisonings, assassinations, sabotage operations, all kinds of cyber attacks and influence operations. The sensors that we see that they're putting down around critical pipelines, efforts to butcher undersea cables. Right, so my position has been, for a long time now, I gave a talk on this to an audience in Stockbridge, back whenever that was. I very clearly said we are at war with Russia. This is World War III, whether you know it or not. We are involved in a global war at the moment in Ukraine. And this is Fiona Hill saying exactly that Russia is at least at war with us. It's rather foolish if we don't accept that. So therefore we are at war with Russia. And there's a list of some things that Russia are doing to us. And then we can list all the things we're doing to support Ukraine against Russia. And that's a kind of sort of quasi-proxy war, but not in the pejorative sense, in a very functional sense. We are fighting against Russia by, we're fighting back against all of these activities with all of our own versions of that possibly, but also in supporting Ukraine as much as we are. Now, the conclusion, Hill said, was that Russia is at war with us, quote. The foreign policy expert, a long-time Russia watcher, said she had first made a similar warning in 2015 in a revised version of a book she wrote about the Russian president with Clifford Gaddy, reflecting on the invasion and annexation of Crimea. Quote, we said Putin had declared war on the West. She said at the time other experts disagreed, but Hill said events had since had demonstrated, quote, he obviously had, and we haven't been paying attention to it. The Russian leader, she argues, sees the fight in Ukraine as, quote, part of a proxy war with the United States. That's how he has persuaded China, North Korea and Iran to join in. Putin believed that Ukraine had already been decoupled from the US relationship, Hill said, because, quote, Trump really wants to have a separate relationship with Putin to do arms control agreements and also business that will probably enrich their entourages further, though Putin doesn't need any more enrichment. When it came to just let's take a step back here. This is one of the authors of the Strategic Defense Review saying very clearly that the US has decoupled from Ukraine. In other words, has moved away from supporting Ukraine and therefore in this kind of zero-sum game situation, more supporting Russia. Any lack of support of Ukraine is, by effect, a support of Russia or helping Russia. So we have one of the SDR authors here very clearly saying the US has moved further towards Russia and away from Ukraine. And that leaves them as a very unpredictable partner and ally of the UK. In other words, they arguably are not really a great ally, or that is certainly being challenged. When it came to defence, however, she said the UK could not rely on the military umbrella of the US as during the Cold War and in the generation that followed. At least, quote, not in the way that we did before. In her description, the UK, quote, is having to manage its number one ally. Though the challenge is not to overact because, quote, you just don't want to have a rupture. This way of thinking appears in the Defence Review published earlier this week, which says, quote, the UK's long-standing assumptions about global power balances and structures are no longer certain. A rare acknowledgement in a British government document of how far and how fast Trumpism is affecting foreign policy certainties. And then later the article says Hill was not drawn on whether she had advised Starmer or Healey, John Healey, the Defence Secretary, on how to deal with Donald Trump, saying instead, quote, the advice I would give is the same I would give in a public setting. She said simply that Trump White House, quote, is not an administration. It is a court in which a transactional president is driven by his, quote, own desires and interests, and who listens often to the last person he talks to. I get this imposter syndrome very often, but I really am very confident that I have Trump nailed down. Like, I know exactly kind of what he's like and what's going on in broad strokes. And it's really, it doesn't feel good because this is terrible, but I feel, validated when someone with the knowledge and precise observations as Fiona Hill comes out and says exactly that. It's not an administration, it's a court driven by his own desires and interests, and who listens, so Trump, listens often to the last person he talks to. She added that unlike his close circle, Trump had, quote, a special affinity for the UK. So unlike his close circle, so that is a bit of a giveaway. Like, the rest of his administration don't really give two hoots about the UK. Trump, of course, his mother was Scottish. He's got his golf club in Scotland. He has an affinity for the royal families, blah, blah, blah. Trump had a special affinity for the UK based partly on his own family ties. His mother came from the Hebridean island of Lewis, emigrating to New York aged 18. And an admiration for the royal family, particularly the late Queen. Quote, he talked endlessly about that, she said. On the other hand, Hill is no fan of the populist right administration in the White House and worries it could come to Britain if the same culture wars are allowed to develop with the encouragement of Republicans from the US. And she goes on to talk about how the new reform run, and I've got loads of information backed up to do a video on about this. The reform run councils like Kent and County Durham Council are trying to import Doge people and a Doge style agenda of looking at fraud and abuse that kind of isn't there type thing. And they are just importing that MAGA republicanism into the UK. And that is really worrying. So from her point of view, that is definitely a worry. So anyway, but I won't derail this video because the conclusion is that Trump really is not, and the US really is not a reliable ally to Canada, Australia, the EU, Europe at large, including the UK. And we are at war with Russia. We are going to have to go this alone. And Trump is never, for a single second at the moment, giving us any indication or evidence otherwise. He is not coming to help Ukraine where he could. He is not putting on pressure to Russia where he should. He is moving the US away from being supportive of both Europe and Ukraine. And as such, is moving towards helping out Russia more and more. And you can see that in his rhetoric, and you can see that in the actions of the government, including their Secretary of Defense not even bothering to turn up to Ramstein. Just, there we are. None of this is good news. But if you're still someone that thinks Trump's the right guy for Ukraine, you probably need to get your head checked and wonder whether you are existing in a cult where this single person has that grasp on you, because there is no evidence to support that. If the US ends up supporting Ukraine, it will be by accident, not by design. And that could still happen, and I hold out hope that that will happen. But it will not be in line with what Trump's true desires are. Okay. Thanks for that. Take care. Speak soon.